I told you I'd be back, and here I am. In this video, I'm going to be ranking all 6 Terminator movies. So without further ado, let us begin. First of all, we shall start with the film that started it all, The Terminator. Released in 1984 and directed by James Cameron, The Terminator started off the iconic sci-fi series. A simple story about a woman trying to survive against a killing cyborg sent from the future to terminate her before her son will be born to lead the human resistance against the machines. As I said, the film is very simple, however, it does have monumental flaws in it, even to this day. For a start, the acting is fucking horrendous, especially among the main characters. Ironically, it is the T-800 portrayed by Arnold Schwarzenegger that has the best and most memorable acting, and he's a bland character. As for the story itself, it is very simple, but it is the atmosphere and the tension this film creates that makes it stand out from all others at its time. The Terminator builds a really creepy atmosphere, and as the film goes on, the more damaged the T-800 becomes, the more we get to see the metal endoskeleton beneath, and the more this horrifying image of this man, part machine, trying to kill you gets etched into our minds. The soundtrack was done by Brad Fiedel, and the soundtrack is very good. Ironically, there's a main theme that appears in this movie that sounds a lot like the theme that plays in Slender the Eight Pages. Kind of fitting, don't you think? Overall, this film, like I said, is simple, but its premise relies entirely on its atmosphere more than its interaction and its stories. So with that said, I give The Terminator a 5 out of 10. Next up, Terminator 2 Judgment Day. The one everyone claims is the greatest action movie of all time. And while this is a huge improvement in the first one in terms of acting and story development, this one still has flaws. Most noticeably, it creates a rather annoying paradox situation that makes you completely look at the first Terminator in a different light. And that is the whole thing about the T-800 getting destroyed. The first one leads to the creation of Skynet at the hands of Cyberdyne in T2. But if the T-100 had killed Sarah, then he would never have been destroyed, and so Cyberdyne would never have created Skynet. There would never have been a Terminator sent back. Sarah would not have been killed. Skynet would not exist. There would be no war. So that is a massive flaw in the story of this one. However, the acting is severely improved, and the story branches out a bit more than it did in the first one, introducing new characters, including the iconic John Connor, the integral part of the story. John Connor, portrayed by Edward Furlong, is a young kid in this, and he acts like pretty much every other 10-year-old you'd expect in the 80s, which I think was done deliberately to show the audience that this ordinary looking kid will one day grow to do great things, even if he doesn't believe he himself will do it. This one also has a menacing atmosphere similar to the first one. The T-1000 is the new Terminator in this one, and even to this day, after all these years, the T-1000 is still one of the most horrifying, creepy things ever created in movie history. The idea of this liquid metal thing that can come out of the floors and the walls, mimic your family members, and protrude long blades from its arms just sends chills down your spine. Very well portrayed, Robert Patrick. Very good. The T-800, of course, returned in this movie as a good guy, which was one of the most shocking things back in the day, considering Arnold Schwarzenegger won several awards for Best Villain with The Terminator, and was now winning awards for Best Good Guy in Terminator 2. The story, as I said, follows Sarah, who is now in a mental asylum, and John Connor growing up, who is now being pursued by a new Terminator, the T-1000, and now being protected by a reprogrammed T-800. The Judgment Day element of this film doesn't come until late into the movie, and Cyberdyne is introduced. And this is where my problem with the story begins. as the movie kind of feels unevenly paced and longer than it necessarily needs to be. In certain ways, the Cyberdyne section of the film kind of feels like an afterthought that was just thrown in to make the movie longer. It worked, and the movie has a great ending. It just felt thrown in at the end and kind of takes away from my enjoyment of it because of how long the movie overall feels. Even though it has iconic action and its practical effects and CGI are outstanding for the time, way ahead of its time. Fun fact, it's also the first movie to have ever been made for $100 million. With that said, Terminator 2, I give it a 6 out of 10. Next up, the sequel nobody asked for, Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, released in 2003. This one was not done by James Cameron, it was done by an entirely new crew, I believe. Although Brad Fiedel did return to do the soundtrack again. Terminator 3, basically, you might be thinking to yourself, how is this even possible, considering Skynet and everything leading to the creation of the Terminators was destroyed at the end of T2. This movie just said, fuck it, it all happens anyway because it's inevitable. The military end up creating Skynet instead of Cyberdyne, and so John, who is now a young man, even though he knows he stopped Judgment Day, he's still hiding because he's afraid a Terminator will come after him, even though he should know Terminators no longer exist. They killed off Sarah Connor off screen, which was a very bad move. I don't understand why. Probably to fit in this film's new female protagonist, Catherine Brewster, who I will say is the only other strong female character in this franchise apart from Sarah Connor. The acting in this film is once again terrible. Nick Stahl, maybe he's better in other movies, I've never seen him in another movie, but in Terminator 3, he fucking sucks. He can't act for shit. Part of that is probably due to the really bad directing and the overall bad script he was given. I can't really tell. The TX, which is the new model Terminator that's supposed to be more advanced, is actually weaker and inferior to the T-1000, even though they claim it to be more advanced, which I don't understand. She's given more of a personality in terms of using her femininity to overcome and overwhelm men around her. But just the acting and the way Kristana Loken was told to act as a TX just feels unnatural and unbelievable as a Terminator. You don't fear her because she's inferior to the T-1000, and her line delivery, it just comes across as cringy half the time. After all, who could forget that scene where she inflated her tits after being pursued by the cops straight away after emerging from the time sphere? So overall, Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, I give it a 4 out of 10. It stands out as a classic to this day, like the first two, but for bad reasons. The movie that didn't need to exist, although, contrary to popular opinion, I will say this has the best ending of any Terminator movie, simply because it's shocking to expect John and Catherine Brewster to stop Skynet, but then they end up in a bunker right as the nuclear bombs fall. Leaves goosebumps down my spine every time. And with that being said, we're moving on to this piece of filth. Terminator Salvation. Released in 2009, so 10 years ago. Directed by MCG, whatever his name is just initials, I have no fucking clue. I don't think Brad Fiedel did this one, but this film had a really bad soundtrack. Much like Terminator 3, ironically, I didn't mention that, but Terminator 3 had a shit soundtrack. Bar the TX's theme. Anyway, Salvation. Christian Bale is in this one, and so is Sam Worthington. That's all you need to say about the movie. They look fucking identical. It sucks. The story, there is no story. There's Skynet's developing T-800s, and they're trying to stop him, but, Marcus Wright is a Terminator machine cyborg for some reason. Has no character or personality. He's completely oblivious to everything around him. The other characters don't really seem to care. Kyle Reese isn't confused about this. Speaking of Kyle Reese, I liked him as a kid, but I didn't like the performance given, and I didn't like what they did with the character. The whole thing about the Resistance in this movie felt dumb and underdone. The action in this movie was boring, although it was cool to see some of the different machines, like the Hydra bots, the Harvester drone, which was retarded, and of course the T-600, which is really creepy. But they never did much with it, they never expanded on it. And it's actually the first Terminator movie where you actually got to see Skynet, or at least what I think is Skynet in the end, in the facility, talking to Marcus. Marcus is an irritating character, much like John Connor in this one, since he looks fucking identical to Christian Bale. Catherine Brewster is back, this time portrayed by Bryce Dallas Howard. Even though I like Bryce Dallas Howard, she was very good in Jurassic World movies. She was not good in this movie, probably down to really bad directing. And it's not believable that it's the same character from the last movie. Yeah, that being said, this movie gets a fucking 2 out of 10. I absolutely hate Terminator Salvation. It fucking sucks. Even though I will say the concept of a future war is very appealing. Although it would have been better if that was done for Terminator 3. However, we will move on to the film. We don't know if it's a sequel or a reboot or what the fuck it is. A bit like Transformers Bumblebee. Terminator Genisys, released in 2015, directed by Alan Taylor. This one, I love this one. You know, I hate the other ones, but I love this one. Some really great action sequences. A lot of people complain about the actors not being suitable for the roles, but I will say I absolutely loved. Is it James or Jason Clarke? I can't tell. Whatever his name is, James Clarke as John Connor. I thought he was perfect. He was the perfect actor to play John Connor, as he gave off the impression of being a man you could trust and follow. And then the plot twist when he becomes a Terminator himself was absolutely shocking. And he was a really good villain, I thought. A bit underused, but he was integral to the plot. I do have that issue though. The plot is a bit... Well, I appreciate this movie for being the only one that isn't predictable, for doing loads of new things. There's so many like alternate timelines mixed up. It's very confusing to follow, and you basically don't know what the hell the story is about. How the past changed, who sent the T-800 back to protect Sarah as a kid, why the T-1000 was there when Sarah was a kid but then gone for like the rest of the years until 1984. Who knows? Although Skynet being in this one I really appreciated. I loved the future scenes in the battle. The soundtrack is my favourite of all the Terminator movies. And I just liked seeing the T-800 with a personality that wasn't... Like in T2 he developed a personality and human characteristics rather fast. Whereas here it was... He had those characteristics but sort of very artificial and was more realistic and believable. And they explained why he grew old. So I did like that. This one... I'm not sure, I think was done by Brad Fiedel, but I'd have to check that one. Overall, Terminator Genisys delivers on being a really good action movie. Despite having a confusing story, the characters are great. The one exception, I would say, Emilia Clarke as Sarah Connor. She's a fine actress, but as Sarah, she just comes across as a teenager, which doesn't suit the character. Yeah, with that being said, I give Terminator Genisys a 7 out of 10. And now, even though I don't have it here, we come to Terminator Dark Fate, which I reviewed in my last video. It's utter shit. It was directed by Tim Miller, who did Deadpool, written by James Cameron, who hasn't returned since Terminator 2. Terminator Dark Fate, predictable, boring story. The actresses look like they were in the wrong movie. Don't know why they even bothered putting John Connor in the movie or even killing him off. It's pointless. It's basically just a rehash of the first Terminator, but with some SJW bullshit instead. So with that being said, Terminator Dark Fate, I think I gave it a 3 out of 10 in the last video. Go watch that before watching this video. I should have said that at the beginning. But anyways, now the time to rank all the movies from best to worst. This is going to be very controversial, and I know many people are going to get angry and are going to try and look and terminate me for this. But let them come. I'll be waiting. Best to worst. Terminator Genisys for me is the best, followed by Terminator 1, then 2, then Dark Fate, then Rise of the Machines, then Dark Fate, and then Salvation. There you go, best to worst. That is my opinion and overall look at the Terminator movies. Apparently, Dark Fate is not doing too well at the box office, so we may not get a sequel to it. Who the hell really cares if we do or not at this point? I just thought this would be something fun and something different to do. Ranking the Terminator movies in a complete different order from how everyone else would do them. For example, for anyone that doesn't know, most people would have put T1, T2 was the best, followed by T1, and then probably Rise of the Machines, Salvation, Genisys, and Dark Fate, or Dark Fate then Rise of the Machines. I don't know. All I know is that everyone sees T2 as the best. I just see too many problems with it. And with that being said, I think we're all about ready to finish up here. But don't worry, you haven't seen the last of me yet. I'll be back.